He's the former Goldman Sachs CEO who served 5 years as United States Senator and 4 years as governor of New Jersey. Now, Jon Corzine is back on Wall Street with a new firm, MF Global. It may be small by comparison, but his ambitions are not. Jon Corzine joins us now on the InsideTrack. Jon, what I want to know, welcome back, by the way.
Good to be here.
Is just how grand are your ambitions for this little firm?
Well, my ambitions for it to perform well for our shareholders, but most importantly for our clients, are grand. We have a pretty simple business program today. We're a broker. We're evolving into a broker-dealer. That's someone who makes markets and the same things that we're connecting people to exchanges on across the globe. And frankly, I do want us to be an investment bank, giving advice, managing assets for clients. We deal with a wide set of clients. We ought to offer them deeper services in the areas where I think we can bring expert help, advice, and execution.
So why dismiss the notion that you're building a mini Goldman Sachs? There's nothing wrong with Goldman Sachs. You ran the firm for a while. It's certainly something that...
We're not dismissing any particular view. I would like to build it in our own character. Goldman Sachs was never as much of a broker and an FCM, someone who connected to futures and options exchanges and exchange-traded elements as we are. So we'll have our own character as we build it. Very much a commodity-oriented organization. We'll build in that brokerage space. We'll build in our broker-dealer, our contacts with our clients, and we'll build out in asset management and advisory work that are very much germane to the things that we do.
Jon, you've said, in fact, you said it last week, that you're building a global investment bank.
Yes.
Global is an awfully big word. Just how global can you be with equity capital of $1.5 billion?
Erik, first of all, when I joined Goldman Sachs, I think it had something in the neighborhood of about $500 million in capital and about 1,800 people. It was slightly larger when I left, and I think it's continued to grow. So if you are able to acquire and motivate the right kind of people, maintaining the right kind of ethic in how you deal with your clients, I think you could build a great firm. It's not going to be done overnight. It takes time, and you need to be measured about how you do that. We have a long-term view, and I think 5 years from now and 10 years from now, you will see a firm that has changed its nature and its charter and its character in a way that we will be a substantially more important part of the overall global activities in financial affairs. We already are in 14 countries and 5 continents, and we have a global footprint. It's just not deep enough.
You talked about the mix of business that you want to have. Why, for example, asset management? You know, I understand the idea about offering clients a number of different things, but people discount the idea these days that you get full value for an internal asset management business. If you got full value, Goldman Sachs wouldn't be trading at 10 times earnings.
Well, you know, there is another reason. You'd like to diversify revenues. I'd like not to be dependent on the level of interest rates or the volumes that go on in exchanges. We need different channels of earnings power. And matter of fact, I think you are, aside from your valuations in the market, I think you create a much truer, more flat growth line in revenues if you diversify out revenues or sources of revenue. And that's exactly what we're doing. Diversify probably reduces risk and increases yield.
Okay, reducing risk. You've also talked about getting into prop trading, and it could at some point provide your firm with 20% of its earnings. You know as well as I know, prop trading raises a lot of alarm bells these days in shareholders' minds. Why would you want to use shareholders' capital for what is effectively an internal hedge fund?
Well, one of the reasons that I'm excited about our business is that there are a lot of things that if you were in the too big to fail category, if you're in the bulge bracket, are being precluded. I don't think anyone would argue that over the last few years that prop trading has, 25 years, hasn't been an important part of building capital bases in many of the great financial institutions.
But when people think about prop trading and they think about MF Global, what do they remember? They remember a $140 million wheat futures trading loss in Memphis a couple of years ago.
That happened to be a salesman, not a trader.
I know that, but that's what, people connect the dots.
Used the term rogue trader. It was actually a rogue salesperson, and it was really a function of failure to have the right kind of supervisory efforts in place. And I think we've corrected most, if not all, of those problems, and I think we're moving in a very positive direction as we go forward.
New Jersey has a fiscal mess on its hands, a deficit that may top $10 billion plus underfunded retiree and health care plans. It was enough to spur Standard & Poor's to cut the state's credit rating to AA- yesterday. Jon Corzine knows a lot about New Jersey's budget woes. The former Goldman Sachs CEO was governor of the state from 2006 to 2010. He's since returned to Wall Street with MF Global, and he's here with me and Deirdre on the Inside Track. Jon, the current governor, Chris Christie, calls the state pension and benefits situation a ticking time bomb. You agree with that assessment?
I think there's a serious hole in many states' pension and unfunded health care liabilities. We talked about this. One of the ways that you correct that is living up to your obligations and putting money into the pension system. For many years, going back as far as 25 years, governors, including myself partially, didn't make all of the payments that needed to be made, and that continues under the current governor. So if you're not putting the money in that's needed to be invested at the returns that are expected, you're not going to have the dough in the fund to go forward. And that is a ticking time bomb, because you have legal obligations to show up to pay the pensions that have been contracted, not just by current governors or former governors that are 2 or 3 times out of office, but all the way back many decades. And the same really goes for healthcare benefits, where almost no states have set aside the kind of money. It's pay as you go. And those things, just like all healthcare costs in America, have been going up, and they're going to put enormous pressure on all state budgets. New Jersey, because of the failure of the political system to have the will to put the money in the system.
Well, I was just going to pick up on that as the difference between thinking long-term and thinking short-term, and it seems like all politicians are somewhat forced for their careers to think short-term. We know Christie, for his part, doesn't particularly want to raise taxes, but yet there is this $10.5 billion budget gap for next year. What are the choices? I mean, should taxes be raised?
Well, there are things that you can cut in government. You make choices, and as I've said about the current governor, he's got a tough job. Any governor has a very tough set of choices in front of him. I might have made different choices. In fact, we did. We instituted a millionaire's tax, which a lot of people were upset about, raised the sales taxes in the state.
Did that hurt you politically? I mean, do you think that was
exactly one of those things that people were loving you when you went down the turnpike, when they talked about that and tolls? So, yes, that's a difficult choice, but you also have to figure, how are you going to educate your kids? Is New Jersey going to stay at the top of the states in the country and its performance and its comparison to other states? Are we going to have a quality infrastructure system that allows people in a commuter state to move around? And as we address these structural problems, those are very basic, and it is necessary that tough choices are going to be made. Cutting some of those things that I think the current governor is talking about is one choice. But Jon, it's not the only choice.
I just have to ask you a question before we run out of time. Knowing what you know about New Jersey, knowing what you know about budgets, are municipal bonds a safe investment as an asset class? Would you buy New Jersey bonds right now?
State general obligation bonds are pretty safe in my mind. As a matter of fact, I think people ought to stop talking about bankruptcy. General obligations and bondholders generally have priority in the payment system on collection of taxes versus other payments. Some of the municipalities have much more challenging situations because they're dependent on state aid to be able to meet their obligations.
We are back with Jon Corzine, former governor of New Jersey, CEO of MF Global. Jon, Deirdre and I were talking to you about municipal bonds. And you were saying something very provocative, so provocative we had to ask you to stay. The idea that general obligation bonds are a safe investment and we need to stop talking about bankruptcy or default. How can you be so certain when you look at not just New Jersey, but Illinois and California? Illinois doesn't have the money to pay anybody. California was handing out IOUs.
It is, as in any capital position on a private company's balance sheet or an individual's balance sheet, if you have pledged the first dollars in to pay for the bonds, then those bonds, no matter whether you're going or defaulting on other obligations or not. Matter of fact, I think some states are not paying vendors because they're not in the priority level enough to preempt bond payments. I think that's the Illinois situation. So my argument is that on general obligation bonds, you are in a fairly secure position by most states. Now, it may be different for any individual, and you have to check it, but most general obligation bonds are safe. Most revenue bonds that were properly structured and insured, many of them insured, although some of the insurance companies are not now quite so secure, have tended to be much more safe than some of the obligations, general obligations of municipalities, where they don't have the taxing power to be able to meet their obligations.
So will struggling states just cut the aid that they give to local governments?
Well, I think what you're seeing is state governments failing to put money into pension systems, which is making the problem worse down the road. Or there's a big brouhaha going on now about how states have been borrowing from the federal government to pay out unemployment compensation benefits. There's a sweep of a lot of the accrued funds that were being made available for various other activities, environmental protection, making sure that there was, or not making sure, but taking money out of wind farm investment funds and other things that are providing money now but are going to cost taxpayers
that are arguably
later.
Wasteful.
Well, you could argue they're wasteful. You could also argue that there were good purposes, but the need right now says I got to have the cash to pay for the budget, and so those are the tough choices that people have to live with.
But are cities going to default?
I think that many cities are more secure than the general discussion, but there are some that are beyond their skis. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania is a perfect example. Doesn't have the tax base. Saw a shrinking real estate market. States or cities are very dependent on real estate taxes. Their numbers go down, state aid goes down, and the federal government's aid goes down, and that's a potion for some serious problems, particularly with regard to some of the specific purpose bonds at local levels.
All right. Jon, thanks so much for staying with us. Jon Corzine, the CEO of MF Global, also former governor of New Jersey, former chairman and CEO of Goldman Sachs.